My family disowned me when I come out. Years later, they demanded I pay for my sister's wedding. But I made one move that shut them down for good. I work at a wedding ceremony company, and it's one of those jobs where you never really know what you're going to deal with each day. Sometimes it's stressful. People are demanding, timelines are tight, and everyone wants their special day to be perfect. However, there are definitely perks. I get to see the best and worst of weddings, and the upside is that I've built up a lot of connections in the industry. That comes in handy, like when I managed to help my best friend Jenny save a boatload of money on her wedding. Jenny and I go way back. We've been best friends since forever, like back when I had nothing. She was the one who always had my back. There was a time when I had nowhere to go, and she practically dragged me off the street and gave me a place to stay. She's one of those friends who, when you're down, is right there with you, making sure you're not alone. So, when she told me she was getting married, I was genuinely excited for her. I knew I had to do something special to repay even a bit of what she did for me. Working where I work, I've got access to all sorts of connections: caterers, florists, photographers, you name it. I've also built up a bit of a reputation, so I can get people some serious discounts. For Jenny, I wanted to pull out all the stops. This was her big day, and I knew how much she and her fiancé had been saving for this wedding. I decided to call in every favor I had, from the venue manager I helped out during his crisis last year to the photographer who still owed me for that one event where I saved his butt from a lawsuit. It felt good to finally do something for someone who deserved it. I got Jenny's cost down big time. We're talking about slashing a $20,000 wedding down to about $5,000. Crazy, right? But when you know the right people and have been in the game long enough, it's not impossible. I hooked her up with the perfect venue, this gorgeous garden spot that books up like a year in advance. Since I know the owner personally, we managed to get it for a steal. I got the caterer, who usually charges a fortune, to give her an insane deal because I've thrown so much work his way over the years. Even the DJ cut his rate to less than half. You'd think I was just doing my job, and yeah, in a way, I was. But honestly, this felt different. It's not every day you get to do this for your best friend, and I knew how much it meant to her. Jenny's one of those people who always puts everyone else first, and to see her so happy was honestly the best feeling ever. She even teared up when I showed her the final numbers, and that's when I knew I'd done something right. Jenny was super grateful, and being the sweet person she is, she made this big post on social media about how I saved her a ton of money and how lucky she was to have me as a friend. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a nice post from a friend. But man, if I'd known what was coming because of that post, I might have asked her not to tag me. The thing is, I don't really talk to my family. I haven't in years. They kicked me out when I was 16, all because I came out to them, and it was pretty much the end of the road for us after that. They didn't care if I had a place to go or if I was safe. Luckily, my aunt took me in until I was old enough to get out on my own, but still, I've kept my distance. They didn't reach out when I was struggling, so I figured they didn't deserve to be around now that I'm doing all right for myself. But the second they saw that post from Jenny, they suddenly had a lot to say. It started with my mom calling, which was already weird because she hardly ever does. When I answered, she jumped right into it. No hi, no how are you, just, why didn't you help your sister with her wedding? I was like, wait, what? Because I didn't even know my sister was engaged, let alone planning a wedding. My mom started going on about how my sister was upset that I'd helped a friend instead of my own family. It was like they just decided to forget about all the years they'd ignored me. I tried to keep my cool, but it was honestly tough. The hypocrisy was off the charts. They kicked me out when I was a teenager, left me to fend for myself, and now they expect me to drop everything and help out like nothing happened? I told my mom straight up that I wasn't about to apologize for helping Jenny. I told her she's been there for me through thick and thin, and she deserved it. My mom didn't take that well. She started yelling about how family should come first and how I owe it to my sister to help. At this point, I was done with the conversation, so I told her that wasn't happening and hung up. I figured that would be the end of it, but oh man, I was wrong. The next day, I started getting messages from extended family, people I haven't heard from in years, all acting like I was the worst person on the planet for not prioritizing my sister. It was insane. Everyone was suddenly trying to guilt trip me, saying how they thought I'd changed and how I should put the past behind us. Like, really? Where were these people when I was homeless, crashing on couches, and trying to figure out where my next meal was coming from? It's one thing for them to call and text, but my sister? She took it to a whole other level. She tried calling me nonstop, leaving these long voicemails accusing me of choosing strangers over blood. She even dragged my dad into it, who, by the way, has never been there for me. I ignored most of the calls because I didn't have the energy for that drama, but I knew this wasn't the end of it. My family never lets things go that easily. Later, Jenny called to check in because she'd seen some of the comments my sister left on her post. She was worried that she'd stirred up trouble for me, but I told her not to worry. She didn't do anything wrong, and honestly, if my family wanted to make a big deal out of this, that was on them. It wasn't like I was going to let them bully me into giving my sister a free wedding just because they suddenly decided they needed me in their lives. Still, I could feel the headache brewing. I knew this was just the beginning, and knowing my family, they weren't going to drop it anytime soon. So, after my phone blew up with calls and messages from my mom, my sister, and a bunch of random relatives, I figured they'd eventually cool down. I thought they'd realize they were being ridiculous and just let it go. Yeah, wishful thinking on my part. My family doesn't work that way. They don't let things slide until they get exactly what they want. A couple of days later, I'm at work, and everything's going fine. I was in the middle of coordinating this outdoor wedding, making sure the florist had the arrangements right, when I got a call from my boss. She's usually pretty laid back, so when she told me she needed to see me in her office ASAP, I knew something was up. I get there, and she looks serious. She tells me that someone called the company, claiming to be my family. I immediately knew who it was. Who else could it be? Apparently, my sister called, and she wasn't just trying to chat. She told my boss that it was unfair that I used my connections to get a discount for a friend instead of family. She said it was favoritism and that I was playing favorites at the company's expense. Can you believe that? She tried to guilt trip my boss into pressuring me to help her out with her wedding instead of Jenny's. My boss, to her credit, didn't buy into any of it. She just listened to my sister's nonsense, politely told her that company policy doesn't allow us to interfere in employees' personal relationships, and hung up. But still, my boss wanted to make sure I was okay and warned me that if my family tried anything else, she might have to get HR involved. I was both relieved that my boss had my back and super embarrassed that my sister had the audacity to pull something like this. It's one thing to yell at me over the phone, but to drag my job into it? That's a whole new level. After I left my boss's office, I was fuming. Like, who does that? Who thinks it's okay to go after someone's job just because they didn't get their way? I took a deep breath and tried to focus on work, but the whole time, my mind was racing. I knew my sister was entitled, but this felt personal. It's like she was determined to mess with everything I'd built just because I wouldn't give her what she wanted. Later that night, I went home and started getting texts again, this time from some old high school friends and distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. And guess what? They were all sharing my sister's posts on social media, where she was trashing me for being selfish and not helping family. She wrote this whole rant about how I had turned my back on blood and how she couldn't believe her own brother would betray her like this. And people were eating it up. I had folks messaging me, saying things like, "Hey, man, family is family. You should really make things right, and your sister needs you right now. Why are you acting like this?" It was so infuriating. These people had no clue what really went down. They didn't know about how my family left me out to dry when I was a teenager. They didn't know about the nights I spent couch surfing and scraping by while my sister had everything handed to her. But now that I'm doing all right and have a decent job, suddenly I'm the bad guy for not handing out favors left and right? I tried to ignore it, but it was getting out of hand. My inbox was flooded, and my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I ended up logging out of all my social media accounts for the night because it was just too much. I needed to clear my head, and dealing with their drama was the last thing I wanted. The next day, though, things went from bad to worse. I was at work again, setting up for another wedding, when I got a text from a coworker saying my mom and sister had shown up at the office. At first, I thought they were joking, but then I saw the security footage. Yep, there they were, standing at the front desk, demanding to speak to me. I didn't even know what to do. Part of me wanted to just hide in the back and pretend I wasn't there, but I figured that would just make things worse. So, I walked up to the lobby, and the second my sister saw me, she started yelling about how she couldn't believe I was betraying my own family. My mom was right there beside her, backing her up, saying how she didn't raise me to be so heartless. It was like a full-on intervention right there in my workplace. I tried to stay calm, but the whole situation was embarrassing as hell. People were walking by, staring at us, and I could see my boss watching from her office. I told my mom and sister that this wasn't the place to have this conversation and that they needed to leave. But my sister just kept going, saying how I owed it to her to make things right and that if I didn't, I was no longer part of the family. At that point, I'd had enough. I told them flat out that I wasn't going to help with her wedding and I wasn't going to risk my job just because they suddenly decided they wanted me back in their lives. I said if they really cared about family, maybe they should have shown it when I was a teenager instead of kicking me out. That shut them up for a second, But then my sister tried to play the victim card again, saying, "I'm trying to fix things between us, and this is how you repay me?" I couldn't believe the nerve. Fix things by ambushing me at my job? I told her that if she was serious about mending our relationship, this was not the way to do it. But honestly, at that point, I didn't care. I was done. I turned around and walked away, leaving them standing there. I could hear my sister yelling something as I left, but I didn't look back. Security had to escort them out, and I could feel the eyes of everyone in the office on me. It was humiliating. After they left, I went back to my desk and tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. All I could think about was how my own family had tried to mess with my job just because they didn't get what they wanted. I was angry, but I was also hurt. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, and each time, it just made me more frustrated. I'd worked so hard to get where I am, and the people who were supposed to be my family couldn't care less. When my shift ended, my boss called me into her office again. She told me she was sorry for what happened and assured me that she wouldn't let it affect my position. But she also said I needed to keep my personal life separate from work. I understood, and I thanked her for having my back. But as I left her office, I realized something. I was going to have to make some serious decisions about my family because if they were willing to pull this stunt now, what else would they do if I didn't give in? So, after that disaster at work, I thought things might calm down a bit. I mean, they'd already pulled just about every trick in the book to try and guilt me into paying for my sister's wedding. But I guess I underestimated just how determined they were. Turns out, they weren't done making my life miserable. A few days later, I got a message from an old friend, one I hadn't talked to in years. She sent me a screenshot of my sister's latest social media post. My sister had written this long rant, complete with pictures of me and her growing up, and she painted this sob story about how I was turning my back on family and ruining her special day. She even mentioned that she'd reached out to my boss because she had no other choice since I wouldn't do the right thing. It was like she was trying to make herself look like the victim while throwing me under the bus. The worst part was seeing all the comments under her post. People who didn't know any better were taking her side, calling me all sorts of names and saying how awful it was that I wouldn't support my own sister. I couldn't believe the audacity. Like, seriously, these people knew nothing about what actually happened. They had no clue that my family had kicked me out when I was a teenager or that my sister hadn't spoken to me in years until she needed something. Now, I've got a pretty thick skin, but seeing that stuff did get to me. It's one thing to have your family treat you like garbage, but it's another to have strangers join in on the hate when they have no idea what's really going on. I tried to brush it off, but it was tough. Every time I logged onto my social media, there were more messages, and it felt like everyone was trying to drag me into some kind of drama I wanted no part of. Then, about a week later, I get home from work and find this package waiting for me on my doorstep. I thought it was weird because I wasn't expecting anything, but it had my name on it, so I open it up. Inside, there's a wedding invitation, my sister's wedding invitation. But of course, it wasn't just any regular invite. She'd written a note on the back of it in big, angry letters. The note said something like, "I hope you can finally see what you've done. You've ruined my wedding, but there's still time to fix it. I need you to step up, and if you don't, everyone will know what kind of person you really are." I sat there, staring at it, trying to wrap my head around how she could be so entitled. She had already trashed me on social media, shown up at my job, and now she's leaving guilt trip messages in my mailbox? I knew my sister was used to getting her way, but this was a new level. It felt like she was trying to manipulate me into giving in, and the pressure was getting worse every day. At this point, I was seriously over it. I decided to block my sister and my mom on everything. Calls, social media, texts, everything. I just wanted some peace and quiet, and I figured if they couldn't reach me, they'd eventually move on and leave me alone. But of course, nothing's ever that simple when it comes to my family. A couple of days later, I was having a normal day at work, and my phone starts blowing up again. This time, it's friends from work messaging me, saying they'd seen another post from my sister. I didn't even need to check it to know it was more of her drama, but one of my coworkers sent me a screenshot anyway. This one was even worse. She had posted about how tragic it was that she couldn't afford her dream wedding dress and that she was heartbroken because her own brother refused to help her despite being in a position to make it happen. She added all this stuff about how she'd been forced to downgrade her wedding because of my selfishness, and people in the comments were just eating it up. It was like they all forgot how social media worked and were acting like they knew the whole story based on one post at this point. It was getting harder to ignore. My inbox was filling up with angry messages from people I didn't even know, some of them threatening me, telling me I was a disgrace and an embarrassment to my family. It was honestly getting out of hand. And then, to top it off, my mom called me from a different number, one I didn't have blocked. I was so close to letting it go to voicemail, but I answered, hoping maybe she was ready to talk sense. Spoiler, she wasn't. The second I picked up, she started yelling. She went off about how disappointed she was in me and how I was tearing the family apart. I tried to tell her that they were the ones who kicked me out, that they'd ignored me for years, but she just brushed it off. She said, "That was a long time ago. You need to grow up and move on." I was done. I told her that if she and my sister didn't leave me alone, I was going to take legal action. I told her I was serious and I wouldn't hesitate to get a restraining order if they kept harassing me. She got quiet after that and tried to switch tactics, acting like she was the reasonable one. She said, "Why don't you just help her out this once? It's your sister's wedding. This could be a fresh start for all of us." I had to laugh at that. A fresh start? I said, where was this fresh start when I was on my own at 16? Where was it when I was struggling just to make it through school? She didn't have an answer for that, of course. Instead, she started crying, telling me how much my sister was hurting and how it was my responsibility to fix it. I hung up. I couldn't listen to any more of her guilt tripping. It was like she was twisting everything around to make it seem like I was the problem, like I was the one breaking up the family. But I knew better. I knew that if I caved now, it would never end. They'd keep finding ways to pull me back in, and I'd end up being their doormat again. The next day, I decided to talk to my boss and let her know what was going on. I figured it was only a matter of time before my sister or mom tried to cause trouble again. My boss was super understanding and told me that if my family showed up at the office again, security would be notified right away. She also recommended I think about getting some legal help, just in case things got worse. It felt good to have someone on my side, but it also made me realize just how far my family was willing to go. They were trying to use my job, my reputation, and even social media to get what they wanted. And the more I pushed back, the more they escalated things. I didn't know what they'd do next, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let them control my life again. No way. I thought things couldn't possibly get worse, but man, was I wrong. Blocking them on everything and even threatening legal action didn't seem to slow my family down. If anything, it just made them double down. It's like the more I pushed back, the more determined they became to guilt me into paying for my sister's wedding. So, a couple of days after my last conversation with my mom, I was heading home from work, and as soon as I walked up to my building, I noticed something was off. There was a group of people standing outside, some of whom looked familiar. At first, I thought they were just neighbors or random people, but then I saw my sister in the middle of them, holding a big sign with my name on it. She was surrounded by what looked like her friends, maybe some cousins, and they were all glaring at me like I was public enemy number one. I froze for a second, not really believing what I was seeing. My own sister, staging a protest right outside my apartment? That was a new one. She had this huge sign that read, "How could you betray your own family?" It was like something out of a bad movie. She was yelling at anyone who walked by, telling them how her selfish brother refused to help her pay for her wedding, how I was rolling in money and refusing to give back to the family that raised me. I could feel my blood boiling. It was one thing to try and manipulate me in private, but to show up at my home with a whole crowd? That crossed a line. I tried to walk past them without making a scene, but of course, my sister wasn't about to let that happen. She ran up to me, and all her friends followed. She started yelling about how I was ignoring her cries for help and how all she wanted was a chance to make things right between us. It was total nonsense. I told her she needed to leave and that she was trespassing, but she just laughed and told me she had every right to be there because it was a public street. The whole time, her friends were filming everything on their phones, like they were trying to catch me in some gotcha moment. I could feel all the eyes of my neighbors on me. Some people were standing by, watching the whole thing go down. I didn't want to make a bigger scene, so I told my sister, in the calmest voice I could manage, that if she didn't leave, I'd call the cops. She started crying, real dramatic, fake sobbing with her hands over her face. She said, "How could you do this to your own sister? I just want to make things right. I've never been so angry in my life." I told her that she had no right to show up at my apartment and make a spectacle out of this. I told her I wasn't going to be manipulated into paying for her wedding just because she was putting on a show for the cameras. But of course, she ignored everything I said and kept going with her sob story, trying to make me look like the villain. Her friends were still recording, and some of them were even shouting things like, "Yeah, help your sister out. And you're being a jerk, man." It felt like I was being ganged up on by a bunch of strangers who knew nothing about me. I finally had enough and went inside, but I could still hear them outside, shouting and chanting. I called the building manager and told him what was going on, and he said he'd call the cops if they didn't leave. After about 20 minutes of this nonsense, the police finally showed up. They told my sister and her group that they had to leave or face charges for disturbing the peace. The whole time, she kept crying, acting like she was being treated unfairly. She even tried to say that I was the one harassing her by refusing to help her, but the cops weren't buying it. They told her to pack up and leave, or they'd take her in. When she finally left, I felt this weird mix of relief and anger. On one hand, it was nice to see the cops shut her down, but on the other hand, it was embarrassing. My own sister had caused this huge scene right outside my home, and I knew people would be talking about it. I could already see some of my neighbors looking at me like I was some kind of monster. It's crazy how quickly people judge when they only see one side of things. That night, I sat down and tried to figure out what I was going to do next. I knew my sister wasn't going to stop. She'd already escalated things way beyond what I thought she was capable of, the fake crying, the public stunts. She was trying everything to make me look like the bad guy, and she was clearly enjoying the attention. The fact that she even got her friends and some of our extended family involved made it worse. It felt like I was up against an entire group of people who were all on her side, and I was the lone villain they decided to take down. I thought about what my boss said about getting legal help. I didn't want to have to go that route, but it was starting to feel like my only option. I couldn't keep ignoring her, hoping she'd just go away. Every time I tried to move on, she upped the ante. I figured if I didn't do something soon, she'd find a way to make things even worse. The next morning, I made some calls. I reached out to a lawyer and explained the situation, and she agreed to meet with me later that week. She told me to keep track of everything, screenshots of the posts, recordings of the calls, anything I had that could prove they were harassing me. It felt like a step in the right direction, but it was also overwhelming. I never thought I'd be in a situation where I'd have to get legal help against my own family, but here we were. That afternoon, I went into work, and for the first time in a while, things felt normal. I managed to get through the day without any drama, and I started to think that maybe, just maybe, things would settle down for a bit. But of course, my phone went off as soon as I clocked out. It was a notification from my sister's social media. She'd posted a new update, and the first line read, "My brother called the cops on me just for asking for help." I didn't even bother reading the rest. I knew it would just be more lies, more manipulation to make her look like the victim. But what really got to me was the comments. People were telling her to stay strong and don't give up on family. They were encouraging her to keep pushing, to keep fighting for what she deserved. It was like watching a whole bunch of strangers cheer on someone who was actively trying to ruin my life. I logged off, feeling exhausted and defeated. I'd been fighting this battle alone for so long, and it felt like no matter what I did, my sister always found a way to turn things against me. But I knew I couldn't give in. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into paying for her wedding, and I wasn't going to let her ruin my life just because she thought she was entitled to everything I'd worked for. At that moment, I decided I'd follow through with the legal action. I was done playing nice. If they wanted to escalate things, I'd be ready. It was time to put my foot down and show them that I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself, even if it meant going up against my own family. I had no choice but to go ahead with the legal action after the protest stunt my sister pulled outside my apartment. It was clear she wasn't going to stop, and honestly, after everything she'd done, I wasn't going to just sit around waiting for the next thing to happen. My lawyer filed the restraining order, and I was hoping that it would put an end to it all. But here's the thing, my family has this way of doubling down when they don't get what they want. The restraining order wasn't even a week old when I got another call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't pick up, but at that point, I was getting so many random calls that I figured it might be someone I needed to talk to. Big mistake. It was my dad, who I hadn't heard from in years. He started off calm, like he was trying to play the reasonable, I'm just the peacemaker role. He told me he'd heard from my sister and my mom about the whole situation and wanted to talk things out. I could feel the annoyance building up right away. I told him that if he was going to try and pressure me into paying for my sister's wedding, he could save his breath. I wasn't interested. He didn't like that. Suddenly, the nice guy act was gone, and he was yelling. He said I was being selfish and tearing the family apart. He kept going on about how my sister was devastated and how I needed to do the right thing and step up as her brother. I told him flat out that I wasn't going to do anything for them. I reminded him that when I was struggling, they didn't lift a finger to help me. I asked him why, after all these years, they thought I owed them anything. He paused for a moment, and I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to him. But then he hit me with this, your sister's wedding is going to be the most important day of her life. Family is supposed to support each other, and if you can't see that, then maybe you really aren't part of this family anymore. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like he was trying to guilt me into feeling like I was the one doing something wrong. I told him that if they kept harassing me, I'd take things even further legally. I was done being nice. I said they could either accept the fact that I wasn't going to pay for my sister's wedding, or they could keep pushing and face the consequences. He didn't respond right away, but before he hung up, he muttered something like, "You're going to regret this." At that point, I was just tired of the calls, tired of the manipulation, and tired of being treated like the villain in a story I didn't even want to be a part of. I had to remind myself that I'd done nothing wrong, that all I was doing was protecting myself and the life I'd built. But no matter how many times I told myself that, there was still this small part of me that felt guilty. It's crazy how family can mess with your head like that, even when you know they're the ones in the wrong. A few days later, my lawyer called me with some updates. The restraining order was in effect, but she warned me that if my sister or anyone else in my family kept up with the harassment, we might have to take them to court for violating it. I was ready to do whatever it took to protect myself, but I hoped it wouldn't come to that. I just wanted them to leave me alone so I could move on. But then, right when I thought things were quieting down, I got an email. At first, I thought it was spam, but the subject line had my sister's name in it. It turns out it was an email from her fiancé. I'd never met the guy before, but he introduced himself like we were old friends. He started off saying how he understood that there had been some issues between me and my sister, but that he wanted to clear things up before the wedding. The whole email was filled with this polite, fake nice tone, like he was trying to act as the mediator. He wrote about how my sister was very upset over everything that happened and how it was affecting her mental health. He said that, as her future husband, he was hoping we could find a way to make things right and suggested we meet up to talk things over. But then he got to the real reason he was emailing. He said he'd heard I worked in the wedding industry and was hoping I could help out with some costs they were struggling to cover, like catering and photography. He even said that my sister had been devastated that she couldn't have the wedding she'd always dreamed of because of financial difficulties. I sat there, staring at the screen, just stunned. Here was this guy I'd never met, acting like we were cool and trying to guilt me into paying for their wedding. It was like he thought by being polite, he'd somehow convince me to give in. But the more I read, the more it just felt like another manipulation tactic, this time using the whole nice guy approach. I wasn't falling for it. I replied, keeping it short and to the point. I told him that I wasn't interested in meeting up and that I had no intention of paying for anything related to their wedding. I also mentioned that they should respect the restraining order, and if they didn't, I'd have no problem taking legal action. I sent the email and blocked his address, feeling both annoyed and relieved. I was glad I stood my ground, but it also hit me how far my sister and my family were willing to go just to squeeze money out of me. The next day, I got a call from my lawyer. She told me my sister's fiancé had emailed her, claiming I'd been unfair and that they were just trying to resolve family matters. She laughed it off, saying they clearly didn't understand how restraining orders worked, but it was a reminder that my family wasn't going to back down easily. I knew that at some point, they'd try something else, but I also knew that I wasn't alone in this. I had my lawyer, my friends, and a solid support system outside of my family. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking back control. It wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't fun, but standing my ground was the only way to protect myself. A few weeks later, my sister's wedding date finally came and went. I didn't get any more calls, emails, or messages. Nothing. It was quiet, and I was almost waiting for the other shoe to drop. But as days passed, I realized maybe they had finally given up. Maybe they saw that all their tricks, protests, and guilt trips weren't going to work. Maybe they moved on. And honestly, I hope they had. I started to feel a weight lift off my shoulders. I could finally breathe without worrying about another ambush, another email, or another group of people yelling outside my apartment. And yeah, it was a little sad knowing that my own family could be so toxic, but I'd come to accept it. I wasn't going to let their issues drag me down anymore. I had my own life to live, and if they couldn't respect that, then they didn't deserve to be a part of it. In the end, walking away was the best thing I could have done for myself. And honestly, it felt pretty good to finally be free from their drama.